excited to have Gregory Pardlo with us to share his work. A few things, the telephones, please throw them out the window. If not, can you just put it on airplane mode? Just kidding. Second thing is, thank you, Andy Eaton, for organizing tonight. We appreciate your work on getting this together and those beautiful posters. We'd like to thank, as always, the Dungannon Foundation and Elizabeth Ray, who funds our reading series and has made tonight possible. Next one this year will be Catherine Scanlon, a fiction writer. She's coming November 6th. And next up is Gabriel Costello, third-year student in the MFA program in poetry, who will be introducing our poet this evening. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Gabriel Costello. As Micheline said, I'm a third-year MFA student in poetry here at UVA. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our reader for the evening, Gregory Pardlo. He splits his time between Abu Dhabi and New York City and teaches English and creative writing at NYU Abu Dhabi. He's been the recipient of many awards, including the Pulitzer Prize, the American Poetry Review First Book Award, as well as fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. He's the author of 3 collections of poetry, Totem, Digest, and most recently, Spectral Evidence, as well as the memoir, Air Traffic. Pardlo's poetry resists easy categorization. His poems are often rhythmic, and those things that recur arrive with such an immediacy that they are hard to ignore. The image of an air traffic control tower rendered in expert detail is set next to a moment of personal recollection. Perhaps what first drew me to Pardlo's poetry was his ability to pack so much into one poem. In the opening poem to Digest, written by himself, we see such an expert use of voice, a necessary and urgent first-person I that for me, as a reader, made it hard to turn away. We have history, the language of bureaucracy, wonderfully specific images, all not only coexisting, but building to a distinct moment of turn. Rather than just describe his images, let me quote some. Backward alphabet of the sky, fingerprinted, or when the sun god liquors loose each ashen tongue, the planet tattles, or dreams power-washing layers of footnotes. Pardlo's imagery is able to appear both expansive while remaining true. He deals in more than just abstraction, though. His memoir, Air Traffic, is a harrowing, coming-of-age story that interrogates masculinity, fatherhood, race, labor law, forgiveness, and aging, to name a few things. Personally, for me, this book meant a great deal, showing that you do not have to have a certain pedigree or class background to make a life for yourself as a poet. His most recent book, Spectral Evidence, takes an unflinching look at the ways systems of power in America legitimize fear against minorities, how that fear perpetuates itself and leads to violence and othering. The book also manages to interrogate beauty, art, belief, family, some of the fundamental questions of what makes us human. In short, Pardlo's work is expansive, and throughout his books, he's been able to remain fresh while coming back to many of the same big questions. He's a poet that I return to when I need to be reminded of how forceful a poem can be, and I could not be more excited to hear him read tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Pardlo.
Thanks, G. We met at Community Writers, Gabriel and I. This was only last year, this past summer. Yeah, it's been such a joy. Thank you to everyone who lobbied to bring me out. Thank you, Rita, for your always support. It's a joy to be back here. It's been such a pleasure to work with the students here. I've gotten carried away, so I teach undergrads in Abu Dhabi, and I've forgotten how fun it is to geek out over questions of craft and how deeply I can get carried away with those questions. And so I apologize if our conferences ran over time a little bit now and then. I want to share just a couple, just in the spirit of geeking out, a couple of poems that I've been working on that are exploring, I don't know, a kind of maximalist aesthetic that I'm playing around with now. I don't know if it's going anywhere, I don't know if I'm going to continue, but there's this form I'm imagining, it is still cohering, to be honest. I'm calling them charms. And they're sort of borrowing in the spirit of ChatGPT, AI, whereby I am giving the spell, the charm, gives instructions for sort of what to make the thing do. And it's borrowing the language and the logic of AI prompts to do perhaps much larger, hopefully more important things than we normally use it for. So starting off, this is an apology for the use of charms. Afro-pessimism is not a euphemism for a bad hair day. That's what it's like. It always sucks when I start off and it's like, this is gonna rock, man. This is really, right foot. There's Afro-pessimism is not a euphemism for a bad hair day. No joke, it's rough out here. You try to stay upbeat when a beat cop cracks a skull and the court condemns the kid who filmed him. The reggae soundtrack to the first-person shooter's gallery of body cam footage asks, what you gonna do when they come for you? Like it was ordained, which, some say, it was. See, when Noah's son Ham stumbled upon the old man, buck-ass naked, passed out, drunk as a judge, rather than process the shame that his kid had witnessed, the Old Testament bad dad cursed all of Ham's descendants. Some say that's why we're in the fix we're in. For if you believe it, Ham begat black folks. His reckless, let us call it, eyeballing, begat the curse of everlasting servitude. Back before colonial laws forbade black women from naming in court the white men who'd knocked them up, long before calipers sized a skull in the long con of racial science, pious slave merchants brandished Bibles and claimed Ham's curse gave them divine license to ply their trade. Don't try to make it make sense. Things are better now, some deduce from theories of human progress in which fish with feet rise to hunch as monkeys aspiring toward the angelic train and stand upright as God-fearing men. Also them, stop living in the past. Meanwhile, Jim Crow's cheap cologne still haunts the halls of state capitol buildings. Must we pretend nobody knows why we sing the blues? Why we whistle through the blessing in our two front teeth? Why we might turn to the black girl magic of charms that traces back to the two-headed woman dancing between pillars of fire and cloud? Not the trinket on your bracelet or Crocs, but the spells, bits of mojo to drum up strength to live another day free from having slapped someone. Ask Ms. Johnson down the street. She'll tell you, a smile big as a watermelon slice is the essence of enchantment. Be generous with it. Repeat, as DeRay tweets, I love my blackness and yours. And we'll all meet up at the family picnic because, in truth, we are every American, Ham's children, learning to self-parent in a nation forefathered by deadbeats who would have us believe that all will be well as long as we pretend we don't see what we're seeing. So that was the kind of intro, and I'll give you just one of the actual charms. This one is called A Charm for Darkness. It ends on this reference to, stay with me, DNA methylation, which is the process that causes genomes to change expression without mutating the gene. I didn't know this shit really. I'm just kind of playing in the sandbox here. This is the scientific basis for epigenetics, right? The idea that trauma in one generation might be expressed or passed down to future generations. Okay, so there are three scientific or three historical figures that enter. I told you it was Maximus, right? So three figures that are in the poem. One is Wilhelm Kuhn, and they're all the same generation, 1837 to 1900. The other is Edward Muybridge, who you might remember as the photographer who took pictures of the horse. And then James Marion Sims, who many of you may know. Okay. Use your 5-finger discount from a corner store to obtain a pack of Apple Now laters. Freeze dry them and combine with the pestle ground shell of a blister beetle. Apply the neon green concoction as eyeshadow and wear for 4 hours dancing non-stop in the strobe light beside the DJ booth on Grown and Sexy Night. At least act as if you are enchanted by the advances Wilhelm Kuhn made in science while you imagine him explaining how he believed the merest blink of an eye could stop time in the sense that the photographer Eddie Muybridge proved a horse can fly if you chop it up into millisecond freeze frames. With Kuhn, however, it was always rabbit season because Kuhn made his lab a rabbit factory and fitted the little furballs with hostage hoods to charge their eyes with the enzyme rhodopsin so that the light he would later bathe them in might, like trauma, chemically remain. One by one, he yanked the rabbits from their cages, like Kleenex. One by one, Kuhn removed the hoods and face-baked 100 bunnies or so. Why would he count bunnies abundant as HeLa cells are today? Kuhn clamped their heads in his vise and pinned their lids open to imprint waffle grids of sunlight coming from his window pane. We might say he gave them to the light, which is an idiom for giving birth. But to keep the first brightness fresh as snowfall on the eyeball, one by one, he locked the bunnies' heads with a mortal shutter click. Then he peeled their corneas like old-school Polaroids. Wilhelm Kuhn, your lab results prove you are the father of optography by finding the light of yon window burnt like Jesus in the toast onto 1 in 1,000 eyeballs. Who was counting? Your science proved what's possible depends on what you're willing to sacrifice. This charm channels the soft power of all those rabbit's foot amulets squandered in Kuhn's hunt for death's peephole, aka the sublime. This charm will recharge as you meditate on the ritual nature of sacrifice, how it situates suffering as a renewable resource. Meditate on its multifarious forms from enslaved women unnamed by history and forced by the speculum of J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, to give light to their suffering in the name of science, to other oblivions from which, with practice, you may also draw fire, e.g. Tuskegee, the plundered corpses of unrecorded Negro cemeteries, forced sterilization. Yet, as pain is no one's birthright, this charm will lift you in mock rapture, crowd surf you, as in a Marian procession, across a sea of bodies, grooving, relentless masses, stirring with the epigenetic dreams their ancestors stitched into their methylated genomes. Okay. Fun stuff. Yeah, I don't, obviously, years ago, a friend of mine, in a blurb on one of my books, called my work metaphysical, and thinking about the power of suggestion. I don't know if it was actually, but ever since then, I've been trying to define that term for myself and to live up to that accusation, perhaps. And I think it's the space where science and faith meet. And so I've been playing with this kind of interstitial, and even as I'm saying this, it's funny how readings are contextualized by the places they're held in. Looking down the green here and thinking about all the things one would think about by standing here. The rift in America right now and what has been for so very long, this kind of failure of communication between notions of faith and science and the narratives that we derive to call ourselves Americans. So anyway, these are some of the things that I'm thinking about even in this book. I didn't tell you, I should tell you what spectral evidence is. I apologize for all the preamble. Spectral evidence is actually a thing. During the Salem witch trials in court, one could say, and one did, that, for example, Gabriel came to me in a dream and tormented me. And by virtue of that, he's a witch. And it worked. It was evidence, spectral evidence. And of course that got me thinking about all the various kinds of evidence that they're fed into the judicial system in order to produce truth. And it made me think of the evidence that we hear so often today. Well, I feared for my life. I had to shoot him. Look at him. He's terrifying. Right? And that to me sounds like spectral evidence. And so this is, that's the kind of background to the title of the book and some of the witchy kind of themes Gothic themes that I'm playing with sometimes. I want to read a couple of poems that have nothing to do with that. These are, I'll read a couple from the first series of poems, which is called The Essay on Faith. Exordium. And these are titles from the kind of classical notion of an essay, exordium, propositio, narratio, yada, yada. Exordium. While sound and seaworthy, I confess a life of false confessions, false hearts, ample contempt for bench warrants charging me with failures to appear. Let what interest death's elbow grease won't erase compound. Judgments sealed in my ova, my oeuvre, my juvie, and on Q-tips scribbled like rice grains with the starshine of my stem cells. Yard cell, my cracked hourglass, my salt-crusted astrolabe, my maps of the lunar seas. Collect my student IDs, my employee discounts, my almost winning scratch-off. Take my voicemails from the clouds. Dismantle my altar to Walter Mercado, phrenologist of the stars, but stay memory, time's plagiarist. Stay poem, spare tire for memory. Stay reader, beloved, prosthesis for the soul. These poems are also interested in sight, the power of sight and what gets produced by the gaze. Narration. In 18th century France, Mesmer made friends dance and sink like iron filings under the magnetized tips of his Mesmer fingers until further experiments proved to move the crowd, he need only use his Mesmer eyes. Confirmation. True in the control room at the Large Hadron Collider. True at a candlelit seance in a Storyville bordello. A hunger anticipated is no less a hunger, and desire stayed by whalebone and lace is magnified by the silence of our Lord. True like the face of an ingenue embedded in a dowager's demure. True as the miracle tones chorused from the dwarf star Proxima Centauri and the whale they call 52 Blue. True as the judgment of a vengeful mob. Memory foam, wet concrete outside the high school. Silly putty takes up the news. Ars est celare artem. True art conceals its artifice. The longest line crossing the palm of my hand. True, the form thinking assumes that becomes the object of thought. We say at the TV chef, lifting her fork. Confutation. We say black bodies when referring to the iconography of racism. No one would body slam a child, but stand your ground against a black body, and the courtroom says, Amen. Affirmation active in the witness's fuzzy memory. The black body is no person per se. It is the American dream, the via negativa that makes freedom ring. It is the evidence of things unseen. Digression. Like the ancient Scythians, I believe to see is to send spittle-like rays that grapple an object's cosmic elements and resemble them in the sweatshop of the eye. A process not unlike tasting with the nose the hollandaise that surfs a heavy sigh, a measure of telepathy, a distance relation that buckets up from the soul a spinning image. The spirit in the queen's magic mirror was enslaved there, Siri tells me. According to Jesus, adultery with the eyes is adultery. Men see, says John Berger. As if I need only observe an English muffin to find its fur texture printed on my tongue, to prove the tactility of the eye. That lemony emulsion amusing your bouche too. Sudden jets of saliva at mention of the lemon butter's pinch. Don't think of French kisses. According to 17th century slave codes, imagining your enslaver's death was a crime punishable by death. I stopped looking for fear. My looking might hurt someone by accident. And I misplaced my glasses at the hint of truths I don't want to see and pat the bench around me, my chest and hips, as if I might vanish. Ancient Scythians blinded prisoners of war to mark them as slaves. A visible distinction. The eyes, the tongue, mon semblable. Watch me unlock my phone with my face. Peroratio. Dear Jeremy, you've said love is touching souls. If I reach out to yours now, in extra mission, will you register that singularity in the cosmos of your affection? Will you feel my soul touching yours just as surely as you've touched mine? Extra mission is actually St. Augustine's idea that the vision is an active act. Okay, so I'm also thinking a lot about ekphrasis, something we've been talking about in our conferences today and yesterday. And one that was the piece of art that I'm really interested in is Bernini's Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Let's get my saints mixed up. And the question, if you know the sculpture, it's a stunning sculpture. This picture, this image of the saint is architectural, and it's made of stone and steel, not steel. It's heavy, it's mad heavy, and it's levitating, it seems to be levitating. And it depicts the saint, the female saint, in ecstasy, which any viewer today would, I presume, would identify as orgasmic. And so the question of this male artist depicting a female orgasm became kind of problematic and curious and fascinating for me. Nunsploitation. But for that iron's point blushing, O Lord, like a cautery tool for the wounded soul, the marble and bronze idols, an engine of reverence and tourism Bernini distills as ecstasy, this concupiscence, this tantric sneeze. Could Bernini have rendered a pleasure, Lord, not got at the end of a spear? The highest angel haunted Teresa Avila like a Motown hook and prodded her body quiverish with love's heart-burner, a rapture fantasy fathomed by her innermost yoga. Her spirit burst forth, O Lord, like a jelly jar full of lightning bugs, clumsied from my handlebars. Beneath the hoodie, her head lulls sweetly with the funk of that agony glorioso which, if you don't know, now you do, because Bernini lifted Teresa's story, Lord, like a shipwreck from its ecclesiastical groove, and mimicked her signature miracle, levitation, which she murmured into her sackcloth and wimple. He left Teresa's left foot exposed, as if to bait a bedside tidbit, the devil, for whom she had no fear, for he appeared to her toy-sized and black, and dropped by to make her pound air with laughter, all weightless, all risen by pinch and tickle, until she wet him with holy water. Lord, tell me that empathy, like art, is useless and necessary, that Bernini's inspiration is more than a contact high. Whatever he named it, Lord, this bone-still cinema, this Spartan delight, forgive him. Forgive us all, Lord, we lesser creators who conflate our subjects' demons with our own. All right, so years ago, I got to take my daughter to see Hamilton. Yet again, it's interesting how these poems are inflected by the places we're in. And so I have a series of poems that are reflecting on the play and on the kind of story around the play, and I'll just read one of those. This is called, they're all called Theater Selfie. At Richard Rogers Theater, I shrank my face to the box office window and confessed to the Lucite's voice vent that I told my wife a lie. I had hidden no Christmas gifts in the basement, nor yet acquired tickets to Hamilton for my youngest, as I boasted I would. I was now a hostage to the season and my ego, forced to drain the ATM for my deliverance. The ticket guy pshawed and, like a chilly neighbor, acknowledged me enough to punctuate his snub. But the seat map online, I pleaded, showed several dots in March. No seats, he snapped. And we went on like this until I looked it up on my phone. Those? He snarled. You can't. His pause, its meaning irretrievable now, was heavy with the ghosts of Broadway's sins. It was as if a voice off stage was force-feeding him the line, "You can't afford those." His cheeks ripened to prove he'd heard it just as I'd heard it, but that this time maybe he'd heard it in the way that I'd heard it. Face frozen, his eyes went floodlight, making me suddenly real. The veil had fallen between us, and we too stood outside the magic. We were our only audience. As one trained in this hackneyed improv, I knew that I might dress the specter of his fear in comedy to save him. I needed to draw him out of his head. "You got kids?" I asked. He nodded. But I needed to hear the emotion in his voice. "What are you gonna do, huh?" I laughed. Just like, "What do you want from me, am I right?" And he mirrored me, shaking his head. "The things we do." He asked if I could bring my kid next Tuesday. "Hells yeah," I said, careful to stay in character though. I wasn't sure where he was taking us. He bent to root beneath his desk. Then the lucite spit 2 miracles he must have set aside for someone else. The selfie we took that day tells a partial story. You see us, all teeth and safe as bros. You see me, holding the tickets like a peace sign, but you can never guess the price we paid to get them. Okay, what time is it? You're supposed to be ready with this. 6:34. Okay. All right, so a couple more. All right, so as Gabriel pointed out, I have a burgeoning interest in my mommy issues, but that's all forthcoming. I'm getting to it. But the work that I have done, a lot of the work I have done is dealing with my daddy issues. So I'm going to read a couple of daddy issue poems. Metaphor. To transfer or carry, as a man might carry his namesake on his arms or on his shoulders, cheering, "We bad, we bad," as my father did when he saw himself in me. As I came of age, however, I thought my father was, in the sense that means to hamper or impede, an embarrassment, which is, as all language is, essentially a metaphor. I.A. Richards says a metaphor, and I know you know this, I.A. Richards says a metaphor consists of a tenor and a vehicle. My father would point out that he's using a metaphor to define metaphors, a literalization, like the relic to the corpse. Like when Richards asks himself if a wooden leg is a metaphor for a wooden leg. My dad, Gregory Pardlo Sr., before he died, lost his leg to diabetes. Even though he himself would be the only person to see it, he insisted that the prosthesis precisely match his skin tone. So this is the same guy who gave me a Hot Wheels car for Christmas. A joke, see. He promised me a car when I turned 16. It shimmers on my desk now, a kitschy muse with shark's teeth decals behind the wheel wells. Before he died, I told him I would have preferred a Matchbox car, packaged in an actual matchbox, literalizing the figurative commingling of tenor and vehicle, more metonym than metaphor, a pedigree, in other words. He told me to get the stick out of my ass. Greg Pardlo is dead. Long live Greg Pardlo. convertible. My pop let me steer when I was small enough to snug between his belly and the wheel. Any random intersection, he might, do people still do that? Put their kids in there, let the kids steer, yeah? Okay, good, I'm glad. In Abu Dhabi, it's still okay to let your kid hang out the open window of the car, so you drive down the highway and kids are like, ah! Right on, that's how you do it. My pop let me steer when I was small enough to snug between his belly and the wheel. Any random intersection, he might hoist me across the handbrake onto his lap to pilot the wagon before returning me to earth. As I got older, he'd make me steer while he lit a smoke or shed his jacket. His ashes arrived in a cardboard carton with shipping labels and a barcode, heavy enough to trigger the seatbelt alarm as we clipped home, honeysuckle in the air, from the post office. A reasonable person would have put the box on the floor, but well, you know already, don't you? I held him in my lap. You're mine, I told the box of dad dust, lifting my hands occasionally, reckless to the wind, tempting the evening, swinging our private chariot of steel and bone. Okay. All right, so I'll wrap up with a couple, 2, 3 poems from the final essay, which is another series of poems, and this one is called the Essay on Fidelity. Bathing in the milk light of the boob tube in a house that moved like a shipwreck with curtains that sieved wind through midnight portals, I wormed my finger down the back of my jammies to see what the fuss was about. For once, my dad's asthma had not announced him like Darth Vader emerging from the corridor's murk. His scalpel eyes flayed me clean as an X-ray, a cartoon cat struck by lightning. In that moment, gravity wanted nothing to do with me, which let me suspect myself an angel, holy, holy, as I considered the tenders of my dust to dust, until disgust sandbagged my thought balloon and I tisked that boy on the floor watching TV with his finger in his ass. My macho cowardice would not let me recognize that boy as me and said, no man for health or pleasure, twin measures of the body's weakness, should plunder the pervious mercy of his dark side. I wore that taboo like a cone collar. The other day, from an anesthetized twilight on a gurney, I once again lay on my side, weightless, with eyes glued to a TV screen, and let a greased lens gerbil its way through my colon, and thought of you, dear Lord Vader, family history, my doctor fears. As I introspect with borrowed vision now, I weep for you, and pray for you, and for me, and for boys like us, taught to be indifferent to the spirit within. An old husband's tale reckons that witches are children of sexless angels and their human eunuchs. Angels whose self-restraint was inversely proportional to the power to silence their victims. Papa's maybes of a Zeus-like ravishment from above, immaculate. Paul said women should wear an authority on their heads, by which he meant a veil, like a force field, to protect them from lustful angels. Adam copped angel lust from those self-same freaky mayflies who, by turns, learned their grift at God's extensive digit bulging like molten glass at the end of a blowpipe. Maybe God got his from Greeks. Thus completes, like a network of shell companies, the history of qualified immunity. Every man should learn to balance a set of books that looks like an anvil instead of a veil on our heads for posture in the figurative sense, standing in God's eyes where God, like the future, is female, a prophylactic against patriarchy, a cork stopper in the mouth of a gun. Last one. My father, Bacchus, wanted a daughter instead of me. He felt the threat a son implies and took you, my infant virility, scarf skin like a halo, angel of my innocence, four-fledged. Before the ritual, there was guilt. You were vestigial as the divot beneath my nose, where the angel pinched my lips in binding silence. Would I see myself in style or fit if I encountered you, my soul, draped like a lost mitten on a fence post, tattered as a moth-eaten turtleneck, hood like the hood of a headsman? If you were reappended, would you lisp like chiffon or crunch like corduroy? You are the macho my father's dream foretold. He who, in the end, was like a son to me, whose own number circumscribed a foreshortened life story mine was intended to resemble. My forebear, the brutal gardener. He who conjured the corona must have foreseen his own eclipse, and standing on ceremony, found at hand a means to get my sex to bleed. Thank you. So in the spirit of geeking out, what'd you think? I guess, yeah, in a way, I'm not joking, because as we spent the last couple of days, interrogating all your poems, I just suppose it's only fair that comments, questions. I can tell you about the kids. Yes, sir.
First of all, I really liked your poem, Dragonflies, which was the first piece I read that you wrote. And I was curious, who influenced you when you were a young writer, not young?
It's very diplomatic, I appreciate it, thank you.
And in particular, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on Derek Walcott.
Derek Walcott was actually a substantial influence on my work coming up, and yeah, I'm a huge fan of his work. The influence question is always there's a can of worms. They're all in there. I would say my sort of bedrock hero is Whitman. And probably jumping from there, Gwendolyn Brooks.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wrote a great poem about non-bias.
Just a couple. A couple.
Yeah. I just read the one about non-bias.
Thanks. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone looking to get into literature?
Someone looking to, what was the last thing?
Get more into literature.
Get more into literature. The lame answer, which is nonetheless true, that everyone will tell you, is read. right? And I think it connected to this gentleman's question earlier. Figure out who you're excited by, right? And create a relationship with that poet, those poets. We have canons that are empowered by, industries and academies and, universities. You should have your own canon. Think about the poems and poets you're going to carry around with you for the rest of your life. You're going to go through a period of imitating them, and then move on from them. And we'll still love them. But I'm consciously steering you in that direction because so often when I get that question, which I don't think is embedded in your question, when I do get that question elsewhere, what they're asking is, how do I have a book that I can see on the shelf that has my name on it, right? And I don't think that should be anybody's, sort of singular ambition. It should be to write the next best poem that expands your craft, that expands the way you think about literature and experience the world. We live in capitalism, I get it. But that's my ideal answer. Yeah. There's a gentleman back there, yes, sir.
So I really liked something that I noticed in your poems was that at times you really captured what to me felt like a moment, which I guess is very common in painting. Like, you're trying to capture the thought to capture the moment. But something I really liked too is that you captured like a moment and you talked about vision, but in that you also thought of like the inside of that moment was. And I'm starting to remember which, and the brain is getting fast and public. So my question is, was that intentional? And if it was, why do you think that kind of inspires a feeling of beauty, if you think it does?
Why it inspires a feeling of beauty?
Yeah, I think it does. That was my reaction.
Yes, my mother's a visual artist, and so I grew up in some of the first poems I wrote, which I didn't realize were poems, were out of my frustration that I couldn't draw or paint or produce what my mother produced. And so I would describe what I wanted the image to be and ask my mother to draw it. And so that I guess I'm certainly biased in relationship to what inspires beauty because my notions of beauty are connected to my mom and that relationship, right? But I'm sure I could come up with another sort of more literary response to it under different circumstances. I also want to say the lyric moment, right, is a time stop button, right? It freezes the moment, and it freezes time, the progress of time, the expansion of the universe, and allows us to dwell in a static experience and to think about it. And that's what I'm invested in doing, what I'm interested in doing. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you for the beautiful music. Really enjoyed your poems. I Pardlo amongst the others. So my question is really about how is Abu Dhabi and how is that really entering your poetic journey?
Yeah.
Because every place gives us a different framework, a different sun to write under, a different moon to think about other things. So just
That's a great question, yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it hasn't, it's turned up in my prose and in essays that I'm working on that I'm directly contemplating, right? Globality, migration, these kinds of issues. But I think personally the impact that it's had is it has allowed me to think beyond the borders of America, of the America in my mind, and understand myself as someone in a larger world where previously I didn't think I was terribly provincial, but and looking from the outside, I realized that I didn't think the rest of the world was abstract. It was things that showed up on the TV and in the newspaper. But having traveled in the way that I did, and Abu Dhabi is a crossroads, right? It's been for thousands of years, the Gulf region, and so it's an incredibly diverse place in a way that there's no fighting diversity. There's no resisting. It is the fact of the world, and anything else is just a ridiculous contrivance. And so that kind of freedom from the narratives that I grew up with. I mean, some of them I still love and I identify with, but I realize how constructed they are. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk about sort of your relationship to the reader, such as it is in your brain. I loved the line of like the reader is the prosthetic for the soul. That really resonated, and I'd love to hear you talk more about it.
Yeah, I think connected to the earlier question about the developing as a poet. I think early on, my poems I wrote for my professors. I wanted to impress my professors, and I wrote to be in conversation with my heroes. And I think as I'm going along, I think now my ideal reader are my students. Really smart people who are willing to deal with my obsessions for several minutes at a time, perhaps, and go along with me. And that company is inspiring. So I think so often, particularly as young poets, we imagine the readers who don't like our work. And that is something that is stifling. And what will happen if I write this? And it was a kind of watershed moment for me to realize I can imagine the people who like me. I can feel safe in the presence of my reader. What would that do? And so I think that's. And as a way of being in the world too, is just assume the best. And so that's kind of, it is an evolving thing though, thank you, yeah. Yes, and then we'll get to that. Yeah.
How do you navigate your creative process?
It's different in kind of periods, and I think right now, my work, as you hear, my work is really research-driven, right? Because so much information is available to us, I'm just pouring data into the box and then seeing what kind of patterns might show up, and it's a way to stretch my mind is the metaphor that I think of, as I want to be working just outside. I want to be striving to work just outside what I think I'm able to do, right? I don't want to, if I feel like, the example I always give is if I sit down to write a poem about how much I love my grandmother, and I write a poem about how much I love my grandmother, well then I'm not doing what I want to do. I sit down with one intention, and if I am stretching, if I'm making myself vulnerable, if I'm looking for the places where I might discover something about myself and the way I think about the world, if I go to the scary places. I think I told somebody earlier that when I hear in my head, the voice in my head say, "You can't write that." Okay, that's where I gotta go. Right, and so I'm listening for the taboo. I'm listening for the shame, for the embarrassment, for the which you might have noticed in the finger nails. Yes, yeah.
I really liked religious engagement in your lyrics, especially with your response to the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. I was wondering, do you really
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, how do you feel about that? Does that have something to do with who you are, or do you think it has something to do with the nature of making art? That somehow has this relationship to feeling like you're part of something bigger?
I love that question. Thank you very much. I'm inclined to say yes. It is my artistic investigation that leads me to it. But a friend called me out. I'll try and make this a short story. When I started writing Digest, the book before, I was poking fun at academic language, and I was like, these smarty pants are using these big words, and it's thumbing my nose at them. But it was also my way of kind of playing it, as they say, playing it in sandbox. And so I wanted to be there, and I wanted to think, and I just hadn't given myself permission. I wasn't raised religious by any stretch of the imagination. I think when I was maybe 5, my mother sent me with a neighbor to go to church with them. A neighbor who subsequently gave me beer. That's how I think about it. But so I intellectually I am drawn to the Bible, Quran, religion, spirituality as an intellectual exercise. But a good friend of mine called me out and says, "No, I think you're interested in that." And yeah, honestly, I don't know if it's age. I don't know if it's watching my kids grow up. Maybe it's all of those things, looking for meaning in the universe. Yeah, I'm trying to find a way to think about the sublime, powers beyond comprehension. The cringe of faith. Yeah, sir, and then yeah.
It's a closely related question. Your poetry often intertwines with prayer, and I was just wondering if you could talk about that.
So, yeah, in terms of the direction I'm kind of hoping and trying to go with the ChatGPT AI, it occurs to me that when I'm typing in "do this," it is a kind of prayer. I realize that the structure of that is similar, and so yeah, the kind of metaphysics of it, technology, this inscrutable technology, and how it is a metaphor for petitioning the universe for some. Hopefully some shared beneficial outcome. And I think I do kind of believe that there's energy in the world. I get a little woo-woo in my old age, and that there's that something can happen from a kind of shared concentration. My proof of that really is sitting in a room full of people intensely studying for finals or something, and working deeply hard. Man, you can feel that energy, and I think that's very similar to what people are looking for in church or fellowship kind of thing. Yeah.
Where can I find your work? Where can I buy it?
It's right there on the table. Right there on the table. I'm sure, yeah. I'll sign it for you too. Yes, the last two, yes. Yes.
Thank you for your reading. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how your time at Private Economy sort of influenced your poetic practice, and maybe what were some of your takeaways, things that you learned in your time there?
That was invaluable. As an undergrad, I had a fantastic undergraduate professor who allowed me to take the requisite creative writing classes for my major, and even allowed me to take graduate classes. And she's a huge mentor. But what she could not do was provide me with, at that time in my life, I much like the earlier question about leaving the US and feeling what it means to be this person outside of the narratives that I grew up within, right? Similarly, my undergraduate professor could not give me that because of the space we were in. When I heard about Cave Canem, I applied. I didn't get in. I applied again, and I got in. And I went there like it was like a pilgrimage. Cave Canem, I'm sorry, for those who don't know, is an African-American writers' retreat. It happens 2 weeks every year. And in 1997, when I went, it was a ragtag little community of people who were willing to throw caution to the wind and meet a bunch of people from across the country who were equally geeked out on poetry. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, to nerd it out on poetry and asking questions that certainly at the time, I don't know what it's like now, could not be asked in an undergraduate or a graduate institution in a workshop. And so it was the first time I got to ask, to interrogate questions of identity. Anyway, it was invaluable. There is no Rick Pardlo without Cave Canem. It's, you know, and I know for an absolute fact, not everyone, so many poets of my generation will say the exact same thing. Poets of African descent, right? Yeah. Thanks, yeah. Last one, yeah.
I'm a fan as of right now. You mentioned earlier about writing poems for the mood in poems, and I just want to ask, how do you decide whether something is a poem or if it's a story or anything that they're really saying?
Well, there are a set of conventions that people use to kind of identify this is a poem. This is a huge question. And this is, I say geek out on, the genre question is the thing, one of the things for me. Another poet friend of mine once asked me if I believed in genre. Do you believe in genre? And that just... and the question is a leading question because it presumes already that the genre is not naturally occurring, which of course it's not. Right? And so we can talk about all the myriad forces that coalesce to authorize a set of conventions that becomes known as poetry. But I think in this, I apologize, knowing the rule, the whole idea of knowing the rules in order to break the rules, I think there is something to understanding the shared assumptions and getting a feel for the shared assumptions that people rely on to say, oh yes, I recognize that as a poem. There is something to that and studying the thing, but I at some point, and hopefully here in some of my work, the training wheels fall off, and you and you decide, you choose the conventions that you want to include in your work. Right? And it's something I'm always advocating for my students to, you didn't do that because you had to. There's no one forcing you to break the line here or to, I don't know, any of 1,000 characteristics that represent a poem. You chose to. And knowing that you have a choice, and I think is the liberating thing. I've lost the entire track of your original question now. I can get excited, as you can see. Yeah. Something like that, you came close? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that.